Today I'm going to talk a little bit about why initiatives fail from a behavioral psychologist perspective. Many of you have firsthand knowledge of this, and it'll be interesting to speak with you about that throughout the day. But if you think about this, you do a little bit of research, what you'll find is that most great writers on change agree at this point that most initiatives fail. It's depressing, but true. And if you start to read a little deeper, you'll find that people will estimate between 50% of them fail to 90% of them fail, with the average being around 70% or so. I Googled why initiatives fail. And if you go home and do that, what you'll find is that you get about 23 million hits on why initiatives fail. And so in preparation for this talk, I read these 23 million articles, and I found them all to be lacking. I was told that self-deprecating humor was the way to go with this group, but I'm just no good at it. Wait for it. Yeah. This is a list that was offered by John Cotter, one of the very best-known authors in the field. When you look at lists like this and the others, what you'll find is that most of them focus on vision, values, awareness, and these sorts of things. And most of them suggest that we should work on clearly articulating our vision, clearly articulating our values, and communicating better. In other words, in our terms, in behavioral terms, we'd say work on pushing out better antecedents, more antecedents, bigger antecedents. And what's lacking oftentimes is the fact that not only are we expected to push out more antecedents, but we sort of lose sight of the fact that these antecedents then have to be deployed throughout the organization. And it's the deployment part that's the tough stuff, I think. I'll just say that the preponderance of behavioral science research points to the fact that the effectiveness of antecedents, so things like ambition and goals and objectives and strategy and processes and procedures, all depend on the extent to which they're linked to consequences for the performers who have to execute on them. Most of the advice focuses on antecedents, and most of the antecedents are less effective than the consequences. And so I think it's sort of a glaring omission in the literature. And for me, as a behavioral scientist reading it, big red arrows start to light up around, hey, consequences, consequences. We need to think about this in a little bit more detail. But all too often, initiatives are created inflexibly, in isolation, and then pushed out without ever considering, I guess, how are we going to even get the attention of the people whose behavior we need to change in order to make this work, right? So it's a great idea, and it's the idea that's going to stand, not the engagement. So the engagement piece is sort of left off. There are many questions that you can ask around consequences and whether you're properly using them or properly making use of them, I should say. But I just came up with three kind of simple ones for you. First of all, is the consequence important? And you might think in terms of initiatives whether the consequences are important to the leaders of the initiative, but also the people who they've got to motivate to do things or influence to do things throughout the business, right? So the end users of the initiative, but certainly all the people in between as well. And the same consequences don't work for each of us, as we all know, right? So this is pretty complicated when you start to think about that. So are the consequences important? Are the consequences effective? And what we mean here is there's a difference between your intention in delivering a consequence or arranging a system of consequences and the impact that they have on behavior. There's a difference between intention and impact. And I would argue, behavioral science would argue, that your intention really doesn't matter very much. It's the impact that it has on behavior. That's what you're looking for. So good sounding consequences might be highly ineffective, is the point. Points to the notion of testing, doesn't it? And then the next issue, or to consider, the next factor I should say to consider, is the consequence timely? And this seems to be rampant not only in our own lives, personal lives, but in business, right? You're promising a consequence that's far removed from the behavior that you're asking for. And we all know, and the science firmly backs up the fact that as consequences become more delayed, they become less effective. Almost zero delay is you're asking people to engage in something that makes their life easier, that reduces frustrations, that they like doing, that's fun, increases smiling, or whatever consequence you'd like to put in there, right? Like really simple things. Are the consequences there for the performer who you're asking to do this stuff? Are the immediate consequences there? Yes or no? Well, if they're not, then you're relying on things like, well, it's better for the business, it's the right thing to do, you'll keep your job, and while keeping your job may be more powerful to most of us than it's better for the business, it's still not as good as, you know, making my life easier today. It's not nearly as good. So if you think about this decreasing line being the decreasing effectiveness of consequences, and most organizational initiatives majoring on the ones sort of at the end, doing the right thing for the customer, et cetera, we're setting ourselves up for failure in many cases. We're not using the knowledge that's already out there. In summary, I guess thinking about organizational change and change initiatives, it occurred to me that that most initiatives are created and then implemented because there's a need for it, right? In many cases, we're talking about there's a need in the organization. There's a need because some results are lacking. If you think about this logically, the results are lacking because certain behaviors aren't occurring. And certain behaviors aren't occurring because you haven't gone and created the right environment, the local environment for those people who need to behave in a certain way in order to do that. And the sad part, and probably part of the cause, a large part of the cause for the high failure rate in organizational initiatives, is that discussion never arises. That discussion of how do we change the local environments of the individuals who have to do something differently, that discussion doesn't arise. And until it does, you've not really come across a behaviorally sound solution. Thank you.